In JavaScript, there are three kinds of variables: var, let, and const. And I like thinking about them in exactly that order because var is the most flexible and const is the least flexible. So var is reassignable, which means that you can change its value after you've initialized it. It's scoped to the function that you define it in, and it's hoisted. Then you have let. Let is also reassignable, just like var, but it's not hoisted. And rather than being scoped to the function, it's scoped to the block that it's defined in. And then you have const. Const is not reassignable because it's like a constant, and it is also scoped to the block that you define it in. Let's take a look at what all of that means. So here we have a function called myVariable, and then I have my browser here on the right side, and we have the console open. So we're going to be looking at what gets consoled out where, and it's going to be really fun. Let's go ahead and define a var. Okay, and then I'm going to console it out underneath the definition. And you can see that worked, and we see my var in the console. Now, take a look at what happens if I try to console this out above the definition. It didn't error out. Instead, I got an undefined. That's what I mean by hoisted. When the program runs and it's compiled, basically in JavaScript, anything that is a var, it's going to get initialized right away, but with an undefined value. And then when it comes to the point where it gets a value, then, you see it. And that's why that second console log is showing up with the value of my var, which means that if you want a var to be available from the get-go for any reason, a variable of any kind, you want to give it the var type because it's going to be available from the very top of the function. Let's take a look at let. So let equals. And then let's go ahead and console that out. Okay, so when I console it out underneath its definition, I can see it. But what happens if I try to do the same thing and console it out before its definition? Oh, we have an error. So cannot access my let before initialization. So that's what I mean. Let and const are not hoisted the way var is. Now let's add a block. What is a block? A block is any sort of curly brace enclosed statement or area inside a function. A function is also a block, right? So let's say I create an if statement and I define a let inside it. So if I console that out inside the if statement block, let's get rid of this error one here. Okay, so I can see the inside let. But what happens if I try to console it out outside of the block? We know that it's not hoisted, so we shouldn't try to console it out before it's initialized. But what about after that if block? Nope, that's an error too. Inside let is not defined. Why? Because a let is scoped to the block it's defined in, whereas a var is scoped to the function it's defined in. So even if I had, say, created a var inside here, I could actually console that out outside, and that inside var still shows up even though the inside var is defined inside that block, because it's going to be scoped to the entire function and not just the block that it was defined in. The one thing I guess we didn't cover is the fact that these are reassignable. So if I have an inside var and I want to reassign it, I can just go inside var after it and reassigned. And now that inside var's console log is going to show up as reassigned. Same thing goes for let. We have the inside let, but then I could, change it and then console log that out. Oh, I guess it's a let, so we have to keep it inside that block because it's scoped to the block. And then let's console that out. Okay, so we have inside let as the first console, then it gets reassigned to the string now outside, and that shows up just the way it should. Now, the last one is const. So let's create a const outside the block. in the function level. And let's console that out. Okay, outside const is showing up in our console. And if I try to console that out inside the block, that still works because it was actually defined at the function level. So that's the block that it's scoped to. So any inner blocks, it's going to work in as well. But if I were to create a const inside that if statement block, I can console it out inside that block, of course. So inside const is showing up in our console log. But then if I try to console that outside of that block, we get an error, inside const is not defined. And of course, you can't try to change it. So if I went and tried to change the value of const, that constant, so inside const is equal to changed const, and then I tried to console that out, you can see we get an error because you cannot give a reassignment to a constant. So, like I said, 3 types of variables, var, let, and const. They all have different properties, and depending on the situation and needs of your program, you're going to choose which one you need. One tip, if it is a function that you want to store inside a variable, you probably want to use a const because you don't want that to get accidentally reassigned.